All right, so we'll get started, and if other people trickle in, they can come take a seat. So welcome everyone to our third Affirming Committee session, education session. So today we will be talking about the social justice aspects of becoming an affirming church. So for housekeeping, for those who do not know, if you need to use the washroom, you can access them using the elevator on your left as you exit, or the stairs on your right, going down all the way. So today, we are happy to have Cade from the Youth Project and Amanda Dodsworth come and speak to us. So we will have time for questions after each of their presentations, and we'll pass around this mic, and we also have the other one over here. And whoever has a question, and if you have a question and are speaking into the mic, just make sure it's really close to you so that the people online can hear you well. So, who would like to start? Can you want to start? Okay.
Are we able to put the PDF up on the? Yes. My name is Cade. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns, and I am the education coordinator with the Youth Project. Super happy to be here with you all today. Thank you very, very much for having me. I did put together a little presentation for today, but also just wanted to start off by saying that I am a little bit nervous. I was raised Catholic in the church. My dad taught Sunday school. We went every Sunday, but I have not been in a church in a really long time. And so I was very nervous to come here today, but you seem like a really, really wonderful group, and I'm honored to be able to help you folks on your journey in becoming an affirming church. So thank you for having me. But yeah, there it is. If hopefully folks can see, and then I have it just up on my laptop as well. So if I'm looking at my laptop, that is why, because I put this together for this session specifically, so I don't know it off by heart like I do my other workshops. Do you want to introduce yourself too?
Oh, I can. Yeah, hi. Hello. I feel like everybody in this room probably knows who I am. Amanda Dodsworth, a member of formerly Rockingham United and now Hillside United since 1976, when I was born. Like it or not, spent a lot of time away from the church, have come back from after my mom passed away to ensure that my dad can come to church. Am very happy to see the steps that this church is taking to become an affirming church, but beyond an affirming church, a church that prides itself on like having a social justice stance and not just flip-flopping in the wind on really important things. And as an aside from that, I also work for Posse Project with the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center, and part of the work that we do is like queer inclusive education and training, and so happy to be here today.
Yay! All right. So if we can move on to the second slide here, just hopefully things that we can all agree to as a group, just as we go through the session today. The first being listen with curiosity. Some of the things that I'll be sharing, might be new, and that's okay. Asking folks to speak from your own experience. Also accepting that discomfort can be a part of growth. Some of the things in the presentation, naming the harm that has been done historically to communities via the church, and of course that can make folks feel uncomfortable, but accepting that discomfort can be part of that growth and that learning. And then the last piece just being respecting differing perspectives. If folks have perspectives that don't necessarily align, just listening and respecting what everyone has to say and to share. And then moving on to our first reflection question. So I am going to be asking you folks to share a little bit. And I don't know if you want me to pass the mic to whoever wants to share, if that works. Just asking you all to think about a time when you entered a new community and what helped you feel welcomed entering that community versus what helped you feel like you truly belonged in it. Because there is a big difference between welcoming and belonging somewhere, right? Does anyone have any thoughts off the top that they want to share? Awesome.
So I moved from the big city of Toronto to a very rural community. And of course, one of the first days, it doesn't have to be a church story. I'm realizing now I'm telling a church story, and you're all going to think you have to tell a church story. So one of the first things I did in the community was I attended church. And this was a very teeny tiny church. Average attendance was probably 15 people. I made it 16, and my two little girls, we made it 18. We were growing church. It was a very rural community in that there was basically 3 families. If your family name was family 1, family 2, family 3, you all knew each other. You all grew up together. You're all cousins, brothers, uncles. So I was very much an outsider. But what made me feel welcome was one lady in church took me under her wing and dragged me to every event, to everything that was going on, had me bake for every bake sale. I look at Sharon, she's the bake sale expert. Oh, yeah, and before I knew it, I was a part of the community. And one of the nicest stories there was my husband and I split, and we sold our home. And I thought I was leaving the community, but I found a little place to rent, even though it was rural. And they had instead of a welcoming party or a going away party, it was, we're so glad you're staying in the community party. So that's my story.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That's a really, really excellent example. And the reason I'm asking this question is just because trying to help folks kind of think about how it might feel for a queer person who wants to come to church or anything like that, and they can be worried about if they're gonna feel welcomed or if they're gonna feel like they belong there, and that is that's a pretty across the board experience for queer folks when it comes to churches. So that's why that question is there, and thank you very, very much for sharing. But just something to think about if you've had experiences like that, what helped you feel welcomed versus what helped you feel like you really belonged in the community. Because we can take those examples and we can use them in our practice here, right? So moving on to the next slide, talking about what it means to be affirming. And we've got a little spectrum here, starting with welcoming. And when we think of a welcoming church, we're thinking about people are allowed to attend, but they may not feel like they fully belong. Different identities are tolerated, not embraced, and sometimes this can come with conditions. Accepting. To us, LGBTQIA+ or queer people are loved as individuals, but the theology or policy still treats their identity as less than. The welcome is warm but incomplete. And then we move on to affirming, where differing identities are fully included in leadership roles, in marriages, in pastoral care and worship, no asterisks, no exceptions. And then finally, we have celebrating, where diversity is actively cherished as a gift. The church publicly advocates and shows up for the community. And then I'm going to go over some concerns that we often hear when it comes to queer folks and religion in general. The first being, won't this divide our congregation? And to that, our response is every major church transformation has caused disagreement historically. Some examples, ordaining women or remarrying divorced folks. Division is absolutely always possible, but so is the cost of staying silent. Queer people and their families leave when they don't feel safe. A second concern that we often hear is, what about the Bible? And to that, our response is affirming theology engages Scripture seriously, using the same interpretive approach we use on texts about women speaking and shellfish. A growing body of faithful scholars reads the relevant passages as not condemning loving same-sex or queer relationships. And the final concern that I'll share that often comes up is, can't we just be welcoming without being officially affirming? And to that, our response is informal welcome without formal affirmation puts the burden of uncertainty on the most vulnerable people. Official affirmation removes that burden and says your full belonging here is not up for debate. And then moving on to why we're having this conversation today and why you lovely folks have brought us in. And that is because many queer people have experienced, when it comes to the church, they've experienced community and support. At the same time, they have experienced exclusion, they've experienced rejection, and they've also experienced celebration and silence. And churches have often been part of all of those different stories. And then I did a little bit of research before coming in on the United Church journey specifically, and I learned that over many decades, the United Church has engaged in conversations about human dignity, inclusion, justice, belonging, full participation. And that journey has included learning, disagreement, growth, and change. And today, we see many congregations that are continuing to ask, what does it mean to ensure everyone knows that they belong here? And then what an affirming church is, or what affirming church can commit to and recognize and celebrate. An affirming church publicly commits to inclusion, equity, accessibility, justice, and full participation. Affirmation recognizes and celebrates people of all sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions. Coming in here today, I, of course, noticed your really, really wonderful rainbow steps outside, and I really love those. That's absolutely a visible signal of support and a visible signal of welcoming. I see the flags around. I see this lovely rainbow duck that we have here. So we've got It's feeling like the gayest church in town. If I can share, it's made me feel more comfortable being here, especially as I shared earlier, having not been in a church for a really long time, and I was driving past and I saw the rainbow steps, and I said, "Oh, I'll be just fine."
Yeah, they're brand new.
Just for me, just for me. That is a grand welcome.
Yeah.
That's a grand welcome. I love them. I think they're fantastic. And if it meant that much to me coming in, just think about how it'll feel for folks that are driving by and seeing that visible signal of support, right? And that's why those things are so important. The next piece that I'll share with you is just a story to consider. It's not based off of anyone in particular, but just something to think about. Imagine a teenager growing up in Nova Scotia who has heard conflicting messages about whether queer people belong in churches. Before attending a service, they go online and they look at the church's website. But for this teenager, they're not asking, will I agree with every sermon? They're asking, will I be safe here? Will I be welcome here? Can I be myself here? And so that's just something to think about in terms of when welcoming folks in. Those are the types of questions that they may be wondering when they're thinking about attending a service here, right? And then a little bit of tough statistics that I researched as well, and talking about queer belonging and why it matters so much. These are from a number of different studies, and I have the links saved if folks are interested in looking at them. But there was one study that demonstrated that nearly half of queer adults, about 46%, say that religion does more harm than good in society. Many queer people report adverse religious experiences, including shame, exclusion, and rejection. Rejection in faith communities is linked to significantly worse mental health outcomes, but at the same time, affirming religious communities are associated with resilience and belonging. And so that is why the journey that we're all on here together today is so important. And another question for you all, going back to, and if you wouldn't mind going back to the slide where it talks about what does affirming mean, welcoming, accepting, affirming, and celebrating. Just a question for you all, where would you place your congregation on that spectrum from welcoming to celebrating? And a second piece to that is, what do you feel it would take to move it one step further?
I've heard from a couple of people lately within this congregation, why are we doing this? We are already affirming. Like people feeling that we are already affirming. What do you mean we need a rainbow? We need permission from the church. Of course we're affirming. So I've heard that from a couple of people lately. So from that perspective, I feel like we are very far along the process, but not officially. So,
Oh, yes, I was just wondering, where are those people? Are they here with us today? You know, we have quite a big congregation, and it's still speaking, you know, to the converted, really. So it's hard to say where we are, I think. I mean, we're obviously welcoming, and, you know, we're definitely making progress. And, but, you know, it is nice to see people that want to do some lifelong learning around these kinds of topics, and so that we are, because things change all the time, you know, and what is the current thinking? And we need to hear from people that are speaking from their own experience, and that's the most powerful thing, as we saw with Danny today. Yeah. That's what we need to hear, and that's what everyone needs to hear. So maybe we incorporate that more into our services, because I think we would reach more of the congregation, but that's just my thoughts.
Both super valuable perspectives. Thank you very, very much for sharing. Did anyone want to add anything onto that? Any thoughts on what was shared?
Yeah, sometimes it's just little things that I just don't think we think about, and I've mentioned this to a few of the people on the Affirming committee, and I don't know if it's been shared at one of these sessions or not, because unfortunately this is the first Sunday afternoon I've been able to attend, so my apologies for not coming before. But I think it sounds like a little thing, but I would think that for somebody in the to us LGBTQ plus community, it would be a big thing. We have 2 events in this church, and I've got the News from the Hill is our e-newsletter from, this one's from May 8th, and they've got announcements in them, and one is for the women's luncheon, and one is for the men's outreach lunch. And I really think very strongly that we've got to change the names of those. I don't think it's a problem to still have, different ones, but I think the names of them have to be far more inclusive. Because I would think that, somebody looking at that would say, oh, are they even past the welcoming stage? What's that? What if I don't fit there? Exactly, yeah. And so to some of us, it might seem like a little thing, but I would think it would be a big thing. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for sharing. That's also a super, super, super important perspective. And absolutely true, right? If there are gender diverse folks that want to attend the congregation, want to attend events, and the events are, designed for specific genders, then they are excluded from those events, right?
May I say, I don't think in this congregation anybody would be excluded, but the perception would be from the name, and I think that's the little thing that can be a big thing. Yeah.
100%, and that is a really good example of those, visible signals of support, right? I think that's a really, really excellent example. I don't know just off the top of my head. Obviously, I have not been here before, but I'm not sure about your bathroom situation. If you've got a gender-neutral space, that's excellent. That's fantastic. That's great. Because something that folks face a lot as well is, where am I going to go to the bathroom if there's no space for me, right? And something that's also important to note is that it's not a bad thing to have groups or events that are specifically for women or specifically for men, but as long as there are options for other folks to attend, similar events or having, one that's for everyone, right?
Also, is this on? Hello, am I on? Yeah. I'm also just going to note, saying, even just going so far as to saying, women or femme-identifying folks. So it's just, the language matters, but languages also can be subtle and nuanced and all of those things. But, gentle little, it might be the ladies' luncheon, but, ladies and femme-identifying folks are welcome. So it's enough to just, you're not changing it, you're adding even more goodness to it.
The more the merrier. I think that's a really, really, really good example. And I think what you shared as well about, I know you folks have an affirming team, but I'm assuming that's this lovely group here today.
Not me, no.
Not
A few, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And in the back. That's excellent that we've got a specific group. I think that also what Gay shared about if the event was open to the entire congregation, and the congregation is quite large, the turnout is not, there could be more people here, right? If people were, feeling committed to the affirming journey of the church. Maybe people have other obligations, but in general, I think that's a really important perspective to share. And also just a note that I hope that I'm not coming across as, I'm not trying to shame folks or anything like that. And I think you folks are really doing wonderful things and making great strides, and our goal here today is just to take that a little bit further. But I think what you've done up to now is really excellent, so I just wanted to name that as well. Alrighty, we're going to move on to a slide that I called From Harm to Healing, the role of faith communities, and different ways that faith communities can shift folks' experiences of religion. The first example is moving from silence to visibility, naming inclusion openly, which I think is what we just talked about, is a really fantastic example. Making belonging visible before someone walks in, the rainbow steps are fantastic. Also moving from assumption to listening, hearing lived experiences without defensiveness, and letting real stories shape practice, which you mentioned as well, which I think is excellent. Moving from a conditional welcome to full belonging, not just you are welcome here, but you are fully part of this community. And the last one being moving from exclusion to participation, providing leadership opportunities within the congregation, and full participation in community life. And I think just that shift of that title of that group, right? Moving it from ladies' lunch to, as Amanda said, ladies and femme identifying folks. That's providing folks the ability to participate fully in community life. That's a really great example. And now we're going to talk a little bit about affirmation in practice. And these are just examples of what that might look like within the congregation. First, starting with language and liturgy, using inclusive language for God and people in worship, celebrating gender diversity in scripture study, honoring LGBTQ plus milestones such as coming out, anniversaries, transitions, in terms of pastoral care, trans-affirming spiritual direction and counseling, support for parents of queer children free of shame, walking with people in coming out, never rushing or outing them. The third section being visible signals, safe space signage in visible locations. I think you folks are doing very well with your visible signals. I think they're great. All gender washrooms, which we've talked about, and that's really fantastic because that is a huge barrier for folks in attending spaces that they might otherwise really want to. Inclusive forms, pronouns welcomed, introducing yourself with your pronouns is a really great example of a visible signal of support. Because typically, folks that are sharing their pronouns are folks that are part of the queer community or are gender diverse people. And so folks who aren't necessarily part of the community sharing those pronouns helps to kind of normalize that process and make people feel...
So Amber and a few other folks here have their name tags on, so literally adding a she, her, or they, them, or
Absolutely.
he, him, like to those.
Yep.
Is a signal to anyone coming in and looking at your name tag to recognize that it's a safe place for them to be able to say, oh, I'm a she, they, and do that. So
Absolutely.
Little baby change.
Yeah, and it oftentimes, like as Amanda shared, it's really small changes that end up making the biggest difference for folks. The final section here is leadership and policy. Open LGBTQ plus leadership at every level, including ordained ministry. Written non-discrimination policy that covers gender identity. And the final one being performing and celebrating marriages and unions equally. And these are just examples. You folks might do these things already, but just some thoughts here. And then we're going to move into a little bit of anti-racism and racial justice. And why racial justice belongs in affirming work is racism and homophobia share the same roots. Both are systems of power that are designed to police bodies and enforce conformity to a dominant norm. LGBTQ+, Black and Indigenous and people of color face compounded harm and are often made invisible in both queer and racial justice spaces alike. Historically, and this is sometimes the part that feels a little bit uncomfy for people, but I hope that people are able to embrace that discomfort and see it as growth and change. But historically, the church has been directly complicit in colonization, anti-Black racism, and the erasure of Indigenous peoples and cultures. And when we talk about affirmation, affirmation invites us to consider all the different ways that people experience or can experience exclusion, and that includes racism, colonialism, homophobia, transphobia, and ableism. And I also came up with some examples of what anti-racist practice can look like in your congregation, but also just acknowledging, obviously, I'm not a person of color, and so something that could be super beneficial for the congregation is to bring someone that is able to share that lived experience. And
I know a guy.
There we go. Amanda can put you in touch. But
I said I know a guy.
talking about worship and curriculum, centering BIPOC folks, musicians, cultural traditions, auditing sermons and materials for Eurocentrism and white saviorism, reflecting diverse communities in all areas of church life. In your relationships with community, building reciprocal, not extractive partnerships with BIPOC-led organizations, participating in local racial justice coalitions, and asking ourselves whose voices are consistently missing from our partnerships, because those are the folks that we want to bring into the conversation. And the last section being our internal accountability, conducting a leadership and volunteer demographic audit just to see who's involved and who we want to hear more from, whose perspectives we want to include, because as we've talked about, that lived experience is really, really, really important. Adopting a written anti-racism covenant and allocating a real budget for racial justice education and reparative action, which is sometimes, money can be tight, but that is something that is super, super valuable and super impactful. And then the next piece, I'm going to talk a little bit about disability justice and accessibility, because disability justice does go far beyond ramps and parking spots, although I also was able to see that you have an accessible entrance here. Someone mentioned an elevator, which is fantastic. I saw lots of accessible parking spaces, which is awesome. So not to say that those things aren't important, because they are, but there are other things that we can do to help disabled folks that want to join our congregation participate fully, right? So something that often is said when we talk about disability justice, and this is again talking about hearing from folks with lived experience, something that's often said is nothing about us without us. And what we mean by that is disabled people must lead the decisions that are affecting them. This could be in worship design, governance, and physical access. Access is love. Genuine access is an act of hospitality and justice and not a legal checkbox. It says your full presence here matters to us. And going back to those visible signals, having the church that I used to go to was not an accessible space, and I've also I work in youth care, of course, being from the youth project, but before I was at the youth project, I worked in a space that was so inaccessible, not only to folks that might use mobility aids, but folks with chronic illness, and the folks that could have made changes were not willing to. And when we aren't willing to make those changes to accommodate everyone, that sends a message to those folks saying, your presence here is not a top priority for us, right? Or that could be the perception. And then a little piece on intersectionality, which I will talk about also, like the definition of that in just a moment. Disabled queer people and disabled Black, Indigenous, and people of color face compounded barriers, and our access work needs to hold this. Collective liberation is also really important. Disability liberation is inseparable from all other justice work, and something that we often hear, again, talking about social justice and justice work in general, is that we are not free until we are all free. Am I doing okay for time? Because I want to hear from Amanda as well. And the next piece is just about some examples of what access actually looks like. First section being physical and sensory considerations, wheelchair accessible seating throughout, not just in a corner. Often we see spaces that have accessible seating, but it's in a designated area, right? And so that in itself is excluding those folks that need that seating and forcing them to be in a specific space rather than integrated amongst the rest of the community. Large print materials are important, hearing loops, captioning, ASL on request if folks need sign language, quiet and or sensory decompression spaces during services if folks begin to feel overwhelmed. And then talking about cognitive and mental health. When talking about mental illness in the church, framing it as health, not as sin or moral failure. Again, not to say that you folks do that, but just like as a general thing. Neurodivergent participation styles genuinely welcomed and celebrated. No healing framing that positions disability as a problem to fix, which is really important. Then the last section here is talking about systemic and cultural access. Auditing volunteer and leadership roles for implicit barriers that we might not necessarily think about if they don't apply to us, which can be tricky, which is why those audit pieces are super important. And as our friend here shared, talking about how some things might seem really small if it's not something that affects us, but for other folks that it does affect, it can be a really huge thing, right? Having an accessible website and all communications sent out, and again, having a budget line for accessibility. And then talking a little bit about intersectionality and how justice connects. There is a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw who coined the term intersectionality to describe how overlapping systems of oppression, examples of those would be racism, homophobia, ableism, sexism, don't add together, they compound, creating experiences that can't be understood by looking at any one dimension alone. Some examples of intersectional identities and how they might show up. A queer black woman navigates a unique intersection, often invisible in both queer and racial justice spaces. A disabled trans person isn't just disabled or just trans. Their healthcare, access, and safety needs are shaped by both at once. A queer person with low income faces barriers to affirming healthcare, housing, and community that others that have a modest income or have high income just don't need to face. And class intersects with everything. Being a fully affirming space means seeing the whole person in all of their beautiful complexity. And some ideas that I came up with of where we go from here and where we go from our conversation today. Establishing a formal affirmation process or working group, which you folks have already done, which is excellent. Creating a safe, confidential channel for queer congregant feedback. Post visible safe space signage. And then this is just an estimate of time, but really you can do it whenever you feel comfortable if you've not already done so, or if this is something you're interested in doing. Adopting a written non-discrimination and affirmation statement. Completing accessibility and anti-racism audits, and developing a 1 year or however long learning and action plan. Ongoing things that we can do in our journey in becoming an affirming church is annual review of policies, practices and progress, regular justice education for all ages, and building community partnerships and public advocacy. This is a slide. I did a little bit of research on resources for folks that do want to continue their learning. And you folks have the presentation, so no need to write it all down or anything like that. But I have lists of resources that have to do with, to us, LGBTQ plus people and faith, anti-racism and decolonization, disability justice, and then organizations that might be helpful for folks to connect with, including the Queer Christian Fellowship, Affirm United, which has to do with the United Church of Canada, and then of course us at the Youth Project, because we're always happy to help folks with their continued learning. But a lot of these are books that folks can read, websites that people can check out, and then there's also a documentary, and I did some reading on all of these resources, and I think they're really excellent. So those are also options that you folks can explore if it feels good for you. And then I think we're almost at the end here. and just talking about a commitment for today and after what we've talked about so far. Folks might not know that Nova Scotia actually has the highest population of gender diverse people in the country. But at the same time, to us, LGBTQIA+ youth continue to report lower belonging than their peers. Many queer people have experienced exclusion in faith communities, and one affirming congregation can become a significant source of belonging. And so something that I'm asking you folks to do before you leave today, you don't necessarily need to share it right now, but of course you're welcome to. One thing you learned, one thing you hope Hillside continues to do, and one action that you yourself can personally take. And then our closing reflection, just something to think about as we continue our conversations and as we continue our journey in becoming an affirming church. If someone is walking into Hillside for the first time, like I did today, what is our hope what do we hope they experience? What do we want their experience to be? Just something to think about and reflect on. And then folks, of course, are welcome to share, but if taking those reflections and using them in practice. And that's all from me.
Oh my gosh. Sorry, I just had to.
That's okay.
It was so beautiful.
Thank you.
I am not that prepared.
I'm an overthinker. Amanda and I were talking about I'm a very big overthinker.
This is beautiful. I'm going to talk out my arse a little bit. So much of the work that I do is rooted in like social justice and like equity. And I don't think that you can become an affirming space unless you are like deeply rooted in social justice. And so like I do have some notes, so I'll glance down to remind myself what I'm saying, but I think if we want to talk about just the social justice lens of it, becoming affirming wants to move us from like we tolerate all folks to we give all folks radical love and acceptance. Tolerance is an incredibly low bar. Like, sure, you can come in, but it doesn't mean that I'm respecting your name. It doesn't mean that I'm going to use your proper pronouns. It doesn't mean that I care about you as a full and whole human being. It means I'm happy that you've come to my church because, as you know, churches are very often seeing a decline in like attendance. And so to become affirming means to like grab tightly to radical love and affection. So not just the permission for somebody to exist as they are, but the celebration of them existing as they are. I noted here, one of the most important things that you can give to any individual is just to like honor their name. So if somebody, in the work that I do, people come into our office and the intakes that we have are not intakes. I don't need your legal name. Whatever name you want to go by is what I'm going to call you. And so we have had many people in our space that are like, are you serious? Like, I don't have to give you like my legal name because I would much rather be, and I'm like, that you get to be who you need to be. And I'm happy for who that is. And so there's power in that, in allowing people the space to be themselves, fully, authentically, and like without condition or asterisks applied to that. We don't want to ask people to shrink themselves or be less than who they are, because who they are we might not understand fully. I don't have to understand people to love and accept them as they are. As an individual who grew up in this church, what I will say is one of the questions Cade asked was like, where are we on the spectrum of our, and there are a lot of really nice people in this church, and I've said this before. This church has had a history of having incredibly nice people, but that doesn't mean they're kind. Do you guys know what I mean when I say that? Like, I can be nice to anybody. I can even be nice to the police, which is crazy, because I don't love that. But can I be kind? And so, like, kindness is, like, deep within your character, where there's no expectation of another person to behave the way you want them to, so that you feel comfortable with them. Nice is to say, good morning, how are you? I love your shirt. That's nice. right? But being kind is an acceptance of people, the good and the bad that is within them. And I walked away from this church many, many years ago because people were really nice, but they weren't that kind. And as a young person who had a baby at the age of 16, and had people in this church say to me, "Oh, where's your brother?" And I would say, "That's my son." Or they would call my mother his mother. I felt disrespected and unseen, and like as if I wasn't enough. And so I walked away from the church. And I can tell you right now, had my mother not passed away, I probably never would have darkened these doors again. Now, the flip side of that is that my reentry here has turned into seeing the growth and the change and a commitment to change from a group of individuals who, either with age or with experience or with knowledge, have softened. And the church is a kinder, gentler place to be. Do you know what I'm saying? And so please don't take anything of how I left the church to be a representation of how I feel the church currently is doing. Because I would definitely tag my sister in every Sunday if I didn't want to be here. In saying that, though, I think that's where we have to acknowledge that historically speaking, across the board, churches have caused harm in their policies, in their exclusions, in the way that they treat some people over other people. If you're poor, if you're single, if you're queer, you don't belong, or it's not safe. We might say, "Come on in," but are we really inviting you to be part of it, or are we just trying to tick off a box that says, "We let everybody in"? And so it's gratifying and does something for my heart to see people who are showing up on a Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. to have a conversation about queer inclusivity and about social justice and about how those things cannot exist in silos. They are together. We can't talk about being affirming unless we also recognize the intersections of oppression. And so we can't dismantle the homophobia and the transphobia unless we're also tackling racism and classism and ableism, and all of the other ways that churches have harmed communities that are Anglo, white, Christian ways of being. And so specifically here in Mi'kma'ki, so in Nova Scotia, we can't ignore that the Mi'kmaq people have been here for like 15,000 years, minimum 13,500 years. And I think if we want to just take like a little lens from them, pre-colonization, Mi'kmaq did not like recognize the gender binary, not in a rigid or strict way. People had roles within their communities, and some of those roles may have been what we today might look as like a femme lens to that. But they weren't gender specific, if that makes sense. And there were absolutely individuals that were healers, that were like what we might today say non-binary, that they weren't necessarily identifying with one or the other. And so the Mi'kmaq have long held two-spiritedness in queerness, without the distinction of it being specifically queer, which, if that makes sense. Like, that's just part of community. That individual is part of community, and they are who they are, and that's okay. Part of when we talk about the 2S LGBTQIA+, we've shifted the 2S to the beginning of that to honor that this is Mi'kma'ki, that Indigenous peoples were here first, that we are visitors, colonizers, and guests on this land, that Indigenous communities have stewarded and protected this land for more than 10,000 years, and we owe them a debt of like care and gratitude, and we also owe them space to like learn from how their ways of being are. Specifically church-oriented, sometimes I get the ick when I'm in church and the words like Jesus and Christ, which is crazy because I'm in church. Jesus and Christ and God, like specifically I actually struggle to even say those words in like a worship sense, because they carry, for me at least, so much weight of harm behind them that I'm like, oh, what are we doing? Why do I have to say that word in church? Which, again, makes no sense, but is a reality. But then the more that I like peel back the layers on that, I think about my dad, for all of his imperfections, would say Jesus would be like the first harm reduction outreach worker. Like, you know what I mean? Like that he was anti-government and flipping tables and angry. He didn't want capitalist society, and he wanted the folks that were pushed out to the margins and told that they were less than. He was like, what are you talking about? Those are my people. What's up, homies? Come, let's get fish. And so, like, this idea that the church, that any church should be, like, non-inclusive is, like, what have we done? What have we done to create spaces where churches think that's the way that we're supposed to behave? When if you're reading anything about Jesus, you're realizing that it's the absolute opposite of what he would have wanted. Like, he was a carpenter, so he would be like, built some like queer picnic tables and been like, bros, let's make baskets and go get fish. And we would have all been like, absolutely, Jesus, let's do that. And so, to me, like, just also feels crazy that we have to ask the church for permission to be affirming. Like, why aren't we just affirming? Because the dude who's like the center of the church would have been like, do the thing. And yet here we are. And so radical love is what Jesus offered to folks that the rest of society said, we don't want you, you're not worth it. And I think that's what we're trying to do today with Becoming Affirming. Affirming is a lifeline. We know that there is extensive data that shows that the 2S LGBTQIA+ individuals, specifically youth, of course, when they are surrounded by individuals who affirm their identity, their rates of depression, anxiety, and self-harm and suicide ideation plummet. Like, one safe space for individuals to be wholeheartedly who they are is life-saving, and I cannot stress that enough. It's literally a form of healthcare and pastoral protection. Becoming an affirming church also offers spiritual healing for folks like me who have felt rejected and harmed by the churches that they thought were their community at one point or another. I know a friend of mine came out as queer and felt like at that time, he said, I thought that my church had my back. Like, I thought my church had me. They knew me, they loved me. And when I came out as queer, they rejected me, and it felt like all the community I had vanished. And we never want to be that. We want to be a source of care and support and stability for individuals. And I can just tell you that in the work that I do in harm reduction outreach, some of the greatest partnerships that we have in terms of supporting unhoused individuals and people using substances out on the street are churches. And each of those churches are affirming, right? They're all like certified affirming churches, and they are like, come as you are. We can't fix you, but we can love you and we can feed you. And that's what being affirming really is. I'm also just gonna say that, like you were driving up, being an affirming church is not just for queer folks. It's actually for every person who's not sure. Like, I maybe miss community of church, but I don't know that I belong in a church anymore. That is a signal to every person who thinks, I'm not sure where I belong in church anymore, that this is where they might belong. It's a sign that shows them that this is a safe place, that people are loving and accepting. And so we might be, and maybe for those who are like, why do we have to become affirming? This is part of it, is that when you have officialized that, then it's signaling to the greater community that you've done the work, that you were willing to put the time and the effort into taking all of the steps to have these conversations, to go to the church, to get the permission, to do the things, to paint the stairs, to have our pride flags. I brought Amber a sticker for the door that can go on the front door. It signals to the greater community, not just to queer individuals, that this is a safe place to be. Because what I know for certain is that, like, I'm not going to a Catholic church. First, my knees are bad. I'm not getting up and standing and sitting that much. But and who wants to be in church for an hour and 45 minutes? But I'm not going to a Catholic church because we're not seeing that same movement. And I'm not sorry, Catholic folks. We're not seeing the same determined movement as we do within Anglican and United churches that are really trying to put in the work to show community and signal to community that they care and that they want things to change. I have a whole bunch of stuff here. I'm just gonna what are we doing? I don't know. I feel like I've rambled. Church commitment to radical social justice accepts that it sometimes will disturb the peace. Okay. This is where I come in strong. True social justice requires confronting the very systems that benefit the church more affluent and privileged members, and this is a reality, right? We have to push back against the status quo, of course, in support of our queer brothers and sisters, our queer homies, but it's bigger than that. If we aren't pushing against capitalism, if we aren't pushing back against racism, if we aren't pushing back against and making some waves sometimes, and not being afraid to say the things that the greater community says, shh, don't say that, they might read that the wrong way. Shh, don't say that, they might hear that the wrong way. Then if you're worried about that, the wrong people are sitting in your pews, right? And so we want teachings to be explicitly named systemic evils like white supremacy, predatory capitalism, transphobia, environmental racism and degradation, and we want to move congregations from giving handouts to having systemic advocacy roots, right? We want to be change makers of change. Radical church recognizes that all oppressions are linked. It doesn't treat the affirming process as separate from work in anti-racism or economic justice. It's not enough to be a good church anymore. You have to have really stringent core principles that you are willing to be openly, loudly, unapologetically social justice, human rights, harm reduction, and queer inclusive oriented. And you also have to be able to acknowledge the harms that church has done, right? Historically and still currently. Not specifically this church, but churches. We can't pretend that we weren't part of the residential school system. We can't pretend that racism isn't alive and well. We can't pretend outside of even within these doors that some people are homophobic. They are holding those things. They maybe just are quieter about it, right? And so we have to call that out if we hear it, even if it's subtle. And let's see, what else? This is a space for grace and learning. Radical justice requires a deep and uncomfortable unlearning. And for individuals and the church as a whole, that means we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It means that we have to be willing to be called in. We don't want to be mean to each other. If you say a thing and I'm bro, there's a better way to say that. I don't want, if I'm how could you say that? Are you going to hear me? Or if I'm hey friend, going forward, this might be a slightly better word to use, then you're not feeling judged or cast out or that you're a bad person because you don't have the language yet, right? So I think Cade, you made a really great point in taking part, actively seeking out anti-racism training, inclusive language training. We once we know better, we do better. We can't know what we don't know. And so how do we make sure that we have what we need to grow and be different and be better and stand out and be justice-oriented, blah, 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 blah. Oh, and find safe people to ask dumb questions to. This is my favorite thing. Yeah, it's beautiful. I work in Spagnagity. I work on reserve, and we had a lovely individual who's coming through some of our training, and that person asked a question one day that I was oh God, that, wow, that was racist. But they didn't know. And so my response was, tell me why you're saying that. Tell me, where did you hear that? Which then led to a conversation about unpacking. And by the end of that conversation, they were oh my God, I was racist. And I was yeah, that was happening. And they were well, how do I know? And suddenly I'm now sometimes I'm like, okay, that's enough questions, but they're unloading all these questions of things that they've learned throughout their life coming up in a rural community. Like they were like, I literally thought there was gates on the reserve. Like I didn't think white people were allowed here. And I'm like, but you never bothered to check? And you lived 7 minutes from here? In my head I said that. Outside, I was like, Google's free, and ask people. But what it did was create a space for that individual to be able to come to myself and my coworker to ask questions that were kind of like wild questions, but have those answered in a space that didn't make them feel stupid or belittled or dumb. And now that individual is like the most beautiful, like anti-racist, like advocate and like Indigenous ally, like they're doing the work, and it was like difficult but also beautiful to watch them have to unpack all of the things that they had previously learned. And so we have to make space as well for people to make mistakes and to say the wrong thing and to be pulled into conversation as long as people are willing to have those conversations and be challenged on their thoughts. I feel like I've talked a lot, so I'm going to shut up now.
Does anyone have any thoughts or questions on what Amanda shared or what I shared? It was excellent. It was very good.
I'll just say thank you very much to both of you. I think it was very enlightening for us all and a good use of our time this afternoon. I used to work at Dal in the human rights and harassment prevention, all that fun stuff. And often we'd have Wanda Thomas Bernard speak on different issues. And she used to say, if you beat someone over the head with a message, what they'll remember is the beating and not the message. And I think that's really, we have to be, you go back to that word kind, and we have to be patient and we have to be kind. But we have to be able to have these kinds of conversations with people that aren't in the room now, but it would be, I just don't know how we get them in the room.
That is so often the problem, is that the folks who need to be in the room are like, I don't need to be in the room. And how we get there is to continue to create inviting spaces for people. It's sometimes it's like anonymous surveys online that people might be, they're embarrassed or they think that people are going to think they're a bad person if they ask the wrong question. And I mean, yeah, maybe if your question's really bad, but generally speaking, people aren't terrible. They just don't have enough knowledge, right? And so there's other ways to engage people within the congregation that isn't asking them to come out of their homes. You can do surveys online that are like anonymous surveys, so they can give you their responses. They don't have to worry about being judged for that. You can do like online Q&A, so you've put out 6 questions in a survey, people have asked those questions, and then you pick a few that are like really similar. So these are like some of the questions we got, and you answer those from your human rights, harm reduction, like anti-oppressive lens, and you can post those on Facebook, and you can have discussion periods, or you can build a sermon around some of those questions that people have, right? The people who should be in the room are often not, and the folks that don't necessarily need the education are the ones who show up because you're engaged and you want it and you want to be part of it and you want to be part of like the solution finding and the love giving and the acceptance and all of those things. And so that's the hard part, Gay, is trying to get the folks that need to be there.
Part of it, like there may be some people who don't want to be here, like you say, that's a possibility. There's also people who, for whatever reason, aren't able to come to certain meetings at certain times and all that kind of stuff. Is it possible, and I guess I'm looking at Angela now, is it possible to have something like this at a regular service? And so we've got the captive audience, and, like I would think that, yeah, I mean, there might be a few people who would say, okay, I won't come to church next week, but I don't think there would be very many. I think there would be a lot of people saying, whoa, like a lot of the stuff that both of you talked about are stuff that we all need to hear, and so I think why not capture the whole audience, including the live streamers, And,
They'd be like, I've been ripped off. I wanted to hear about God. All I heard about was Amanda and Cade rattling on about the gays.
and it would mean you wouldn't have to write a reflection that week.
I'm actually really glad that you said that because that is what I was thinking, but I didn't want to say it. But just like incorporating those things in like your love it. I'm down for it. just including them and making it a part of exactly. I think that's excellent.
Snippets, but then I think it does need to be a bigger time.
This I mean, you folks probably all know, but it's Pride Month, and so it's a great time to incorporate some of those things. I don't know how far you prepare things in advance, but just throw a little sprinkle of some queer stuff.
Oh, this one's corded.
I wonder if Amber or the committee as a whole could tell the congregation how far along we are and what the next step, where we hope to go and how. Because this morning I didn't know anything about how far along we were, and I could ask, but I don't. But perhaps we could have a little information session about this is what we've achieved, this is our plan going forward, and we want to include you all. And then maybe, if you have a question, send us a note. This sort of thing.
Yeah, so we've been chatting a bit about that at our meetings and having some small updates. So like definitely, especially at this point and in the fall, we'll definitely start having those updates as things, yeah. And speaking even, part of the service or part of the announcements as well, we can definitely find a way to keep everyone updated in that,
People don't know and they don't inquire, and they just assume it's marching along. And it would be helpful to know some of the things that we learned about today.
For real, how long does it take to become officially affirming? So interesting, hey?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And what are the requirements? Look, I don't even know. I go here. What are the requirements for becoming affirming?
So I believe our first step is these sessions. So we will have one more in the fall. And then what else? I was going to say, Affirming United.
Yep.
And then the vote.
Yep. Of course.
Yeah.
The mic, I don't have it.
Start over. What are the steps?
So the steps, as Amber has said, we've started this with our little educational sessions, this being one of them, but we will need to be in conversation with Affirm United and have them probably come and have a conversation with us. We will have to take it to a vote with the congregation. The congregation will vote likely by ballot. And but I mean, by the time we get to the vote, we want to make sure that everybody has had a time at least to listen and to understand and get educated on what it really truly means to be an affirming church.
Yeah.
Very closely tied to social justice, right? There might be.
Don't we also have to meet as a congregation, because we have to have just like when we became a church and we had our message, we have to do the same thing, meeting as a congregation to follow those steps to get our message right?
So we need to come up with a statement, like you had said up there, Cade. We have to come up with a mission statement, and let that guide our values and how we're going to be moving forward. Yeah. So there are steps to be taken yet, and I think we're just at the beginning of the journey.
Yeah. I just remind folks that affirming churches tend to see an increase in membership, so we want a happy, loud, rambunctious church that's clapping when Denny's playing, that's doing all of Anne's movements during music. If we want that, becoming affirming is a huge portion of how do you get new faces, fresh faces, in happy faces in the door, right? And because inclusion matters, it matters.
But not just in the door, as a place to belong and transform us in the process and the world, right? So, yeah. Absolutely.
Of course.
I have a question. When you folks think about your congregation, are there specific people, and of course I'm not asking anyone to share, but are there specific people that you can think of that would not necessarily be on board with the process of becoming an affirming church? This one's corded.
I don't think we can ever do anything that's 100%. We're never going to have 100%, I wouldn't say. Would you say, Kay?
Yeah, please.
That sort of brought me back to something that Amanda said earlier, and he said, "Well, why does it have to come from the church up there for us to do this?" And, I like the way. I'm glad you said that, because I sometimes get ticked off about why sometimes we can't do what we want to do and they're in charge, or if it's the Catholic Church that the Pope's in charge or whatever. But by the same token, if we didn't have that overseeing group that's gone through the affirming process with so many other congregations, knowing what it takes to get from there to there, you might have our own congregation or some other congregation say, "Yeah, we're there. We got this. We're affirming." And they're not, because not everybody's on board, not everybody's gone through it. So in this particular case, I think the fact that there is a group or a body or some official way of doing this is probably really, really, really good, because I don't know all the steps. There's lots of things that I say, oh, I didn't realize that. Or I might say something that's, it's a learning process. So I think it has to be, pretty complete, for us to get there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if I could add one more thing, I think some of the people that, if we can think of somebody that we think that would not be on board, there may be some of them, but there also may be some of them that once they see what's involved and they're informed, that they realize, oh yeah, I'm okay with that, but they just don't know yet. Yeah.
The reason I was asking is, and I think you touched on it really well, I think if there are folks that come to mind or things happen, within the congregation that you clock it, and you, those are the people that we want to be having the conversations with, right? And so inviting them to events, making a point of speaking to them specifically and saying, hey, we would love to have you here, we would love to see you here, we would love if you would attend this, or if there are folks that you're thinking of, have those conversations with them if you feel comfortable and if it feels safe to do so. Because yes, those are the people that we need in the room, right? Did you?
No, I mean, I can't, I'm not, off the top of my head, I can't think of, anybody that would be absolutely not. I think in all spaces, in all community settings, there's always a person that's but why do we need that? So less no, like queer inclusivity bad, more like we're fine how we are. Like, why do we need to do that? So, like, I mean, I'll give this space that much. I think, like, Rockingham and now Hillside has a decent history of, like, being fairly inclusive, but I just think there's some folks that would be more like, but why do we have to? And less like, I don't want to, right? But again, I think it goes back to that social justice lens, which is, if we're willing to put in this much work, if we're willing to like host these sessions and tick all the boxes, dot your I's, cross your T's, do the thing, takes 2 years, we're all committed, we're in it for the long haul, then what we're doing is signaling that this isn't just lip service, it's not just painted stairs, it's not a flag on a wall, it's actual effort, it's education, it's a connection and community that went into it. So I still think it's a little silly to have to like have 94 steps to get to affirming, but like I do also appreciate that there are steps to get there because it shows commitment to doing it well. We only paid 12. Boy, you guys we need more steps. All right, okay.
I just was going to say that I think there's a lot of people that think they don't really understand what the Affirming Committee is doing, and they think you're doing all the work for them, and they don't have to come out to sessions. They don't realize the sessions are for learning, and I really like the idea of having like a session during church time. Yeah, because like for me, we come here for 9:30 in the morning. I honestly have a hard time coming back in the afternoon. I've spent almost my whole day here. So it's true for a lot of people, and for other people it's not as easy to get back out. So if it was during the time they dedicate anyway, it's a learning experience, it's a faith experience, it's all those things. So maybe that's what we do need to do to include other people and get the crowd in.
Trickery. Brenda, were you going to say something?
The other thing I was thinking of is we do in the United Church now these affirming clusters. So churches within a certain period of like a geographical period within 50 kilometers of one another are now having these affirming committees to make decisions going forward as a church. We can now have affirming clusters. So we are meeting with other churches about them and their affirming process and what did they bump into, what to look out for, what are some really helpful things to do, and what to possibly be prepared for, like the email that you might get. Like, be aware of that, and this is how we dealt with that.
Does anybody have any, like, big burning questions? No? Do you all feel more queer inclusive now? More inclusive.
There you go.
Yes, exactly. I also think that there are community members out there that do like queer inclusive language training that there's really good folks out in the community that you can set aside an evening and make a pot of chili and invite folks in and make them pay $7 to come eat dinner and listen to someone tell them like information they need, right? I agree that it's hard. A lot of this congregation is an older congregation, and it is challenging for folks. Some people are getting drives here in the morning. Oops, sorry. But they don't necessarily have access to a ride later on to come back in the afternoon. But if you like set aside like an evening, a 2-hour stint in the evening where folks can come and socialize and have fellowship and maybe like a light meal or something to eat and then have some education thrown in there, it then becomes a social moment for folks, which I think that they're like, especially for some of the older folks in this, it's really good to get them out and social and like learning, keep our brains sharp. I will also include myself as an older folk because I'm getting there. Yeah.
Less
Hi.
intimidated too.
Yes.
Just on the like evening supper and conversation, I will say that we were thinking about that at our last meeting and trying to find ways to have more people attend. So we're thinking that for our session in the fall, that we're going to have more of a luncheon and then have our conversation and like stories and things. Like to combine maybe with our welcome lunch or something like that in the fall when everyone's coming back from the summer. So, but that's, yeah. So it's kind of similar to that as well.
I just want to put a plug into the language thing. So I'm the higher end of middle-aged, maybe a little bit more than just the higher end. And so my generation, we grew up, queer was not a word you ever said. It was right up there with the N word. Like you never, ever said, this is perhaps the first time I've ever said the word queer. And I have people in my life from all different aspects of the LGBTQ plus. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is the language is an important thing. Language keeps changing. We've gone through, racially, we've gone through, you call people of color this, you call them this, you call them this. No, you don't call them that anymore, you call them this. And it's the same with the gay community, I guess the queer community. It changes. And so I think I would really like to put a plug in for the language. The last time that I met someone from the Youth Project, the focus was all on language. And it was an excellent session. Not that I'm disappointed with what you did today. It was very well researched, and thank you very much.
I was going to share that, like I was saying at the beginning, I haven't been in a church probably in 18 years. I'm 28. And in a really wonderful way, this conversation and these discussions have felt very healing for me, because part of the reason why I stopped going to church is because I was coming out as queer, and then later came out as trans, and didn't feel like it was a space for me. So we're here every Sunday. That said, of course, I was saying you want to hear from other perspectives, but I was just going to say I'd be happy to come back and continue working with you while you're on this journey. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't know if you want to limit your supper and learning experience and whatever it is to just our church community. Maybe it needs to be the whole community. Advertised, anybody's welcome.
I think more than ever, those opportunities for connection and for learning are super important. I've learned, especially since coming into this position, but we've all seen what's going on across the world, specifically thinking about the States, and also in Alberta. What's been going on with the targeting of queer and trans people, I have also experienced in my position, people don't want me coming into their schools. People don't want me talking to their children. Yeah. The reason I'm sharing that is because I think that's a really important perspective, is that, of course, it's important for the congregation here, but to open it up to community as well. I don't think there's ever been a better time to do that, because things are kind of scary.
I wonder if it would be like come, eat soup and ask queer folks.
Ask a queer person.
It's a queer Q&A. And then we just have to eat gummies or something ahead of time so that we don't yell at people. I don't know. But I genuinely there's a space for people to be able to ask their questions as they know the language. We talk in the work that I do. We talk a lot about language. We do queer inclusive language. We also talk about anti-stigma for folks who are using substances. We talk about when we're I work on reserve, and so how are we using language and how has language changed and evolved. And so a lot of the work that I do revolves around language, and people sometimes are afraid to ask a question because they know they don't have the right or current language. So giving people a place to be able to say, I'm going to use the words that I know, but I'm using the words that I know because I want you to educate me in a different way is like really important, actually. So that would be like a queer Q&A would be hilarious. I'm in. Let's go. Let's do it tomorrow.
I don't know if this would make sense for this space, but also just another thought is that you have this really fantastic setup here, and one of the resources that was in my presentation is a documentary, and so maybe there's times where we're putting on a documentary. Maybe there's times where there's a specific book that I put on the presentation that I have also worked through myself, and it's called Me and White Supremacy. And it's really, really a fantastic resource, and a lot of it has to do with group discussion and activities and things like that. So resources like that, also having people gather and work through some of those activities together and answering those questions together could be another really great option too.
If you have a budget, if you have a training budget, I literally have people for all of those things. Some of them are cheaper than other people, but some of them are, but really good. And like locally, right? Like they're all like local folks. This is what they do is educate community. So.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for inviting. Yeah.
I'm not allowed to stay for coffee anymore, probably after today.
Yes, thank you for having us in and for inviting us to speak.
All right, so yes, thank you, Kate and Amanda, for coming and speaking. And thank you to all of you for coming. I'm very happy to say this is our biggest session, and I hope our last one in the fall will be bigger. So now there are some refreshments and treats at the back, I believe. So if you want to take a treat while you leave, you can. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.